Hey, Writerly Besties, and welcome to the Writing with Anna new podcast where we talk about all things writing. I am very, very excited for today's video because we're going to be talking about exactly how you should start writing your story and the way you should write your story. And so you maybe have come to this episode kind of finishing your book, finishing plotting, finishing character developing, world building, everything like that. But it comes to a time where you ask yourself this very important question, and that question is, how should I tell my story? And more specifically, should I tell my story in first or third person? I think it's extremely important to kind of figure out what sort of POV best suits your story and the way you want it to be told. So of course it's really important because your story has a voice. It literally has its own voice, and it really depends on your choice to how it's told. And you can do it through these two options, and sometimes it gets a little bit frustrating, at least for me, when I decide, would it be best if I told it first person or third person? So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. I do want to preface that I've actually, written a few books which do have both first person and also third person. And there is actually something I want to talk about at the end of the episode about my favorite and why I choose that specific writing style and writing POV voice every single time. And that seriously is my best. And I don't think it really fits into any of these two categories, but yeah, stay tuned for that. But anyways, first I want to definitely talk about the freedoms and restrictions to both first person and third person, and also how you can use these sorts of tips and just these sorts of points to kind of distinguish which option would best suit your book. So first I want to start it off with first person. What are the freedoms? What are the good things about first person? Okay. So I kind of have a list, and let me know if that's kind of something you want to have in your story. So I think first person is extremely good for if you like to write monologues, and if monologues is an important part of your story. Usually if your story is actually very character driven, you kind of want to be in the character's head a lot. Maybe, they're dealing with a lot of internal conflict, which you really want to get into very deeply in your story. I think through monologuing and through writing in first person, of course, that's going to shine through extremely well. Also, in terms of feelings, your character's expressions inwardly and also outwardly, and also just their reactions to things, because usually if you just compare, I know I'm kind of talking about third person here, but we're trying to focus on first person, but just a little comparison. When you think about feelings from a third person's perspective, you can't really truly get the true reaction of that person. And it's something you really have to think deep about, and that's why I think feelings and monologuing is extremely suited to first person, obviously. Another thing I do want to say about the positives and the freedoms of first person is also passion writing. If you love getting into characters, if you love really getting into passion and just like all these different things to do with characters and to do with the plot even, it's very good for first person, right? Because you're able to really get into what the characters think. You're using the word I a lot, and you're really getting through to their feelings, their passions, their desires, and that really does, again, shine through with first person. I also wanted to maybe mention as a positive to first person that it could be also easier for you. And this really depends on which, what, part of the spectrum you are at. But I definitely think that sometimes it's easier, at least for me, and I think for most people, first person's a lot easier to read and also a lot easier to write, okay? So that's what I kind of thought as the positives to first person. So if those are the sort of things that you really want to get into and just explore in your book, maybe think about, starting your book with first person. Okay, But of course, we've got to talk about the negatives and specifically the restrictions. So, of course, first person is restricted to one character, and that can have like a whole multitude of problems and issues that can come throughout your book, and at least at the end of the book. And that can include, you literally getting too bored of your character's voice. Of course, if they are the main character, I mean, they probably are, I would expect. But yeah, when you think about it, you could really get bored with your character's voice and the way that they react, just like the character in general. Like, you are picking that specific character to literally tell your whole story, and it may seem very restrictive sometimes, and it kind of is. But yeah, so if you don't have a strong voice and a strong like understanding of your character inside and out, and also the way and the freedom they can tell your story, I think it's not a good idea to pursue writing in first person, because when you do really think about it, if your character's kind of voice is not strong enough and cannot encapsulate the true meanings, the true kind of motifs to your story, it really does hurt your novel and really does hurt the way that, the sort of themes you really want to come across in your book, because they can be restricting that. I hope that kind of made sense. But yeah, so there are a lot of freedoms to first person, a lot of good perks. It's easier. You can really get into the monologue and like feelings and like passion and stuff like that. But there's also a huge restriction of you maybe getting bored. And then also, you're getting, you're only telling your story with this one singular character. Okay, so let's talk about third person. Of course, they both have pros and cons, and we'll see kind of which one you like better. But third person. So third person, what are the freedoms? What are the positives to writing this way? So I would definitely say that the biggest freedom I kind of thought of very like off the top of my head whenever I was writing my notes down for this episode was that you have so much freedom with the setting, with history, with world building. And again, I'm going to try to like not compare and like talk about both first person, third person, but I just need to in this instance. So with first person, you're restricted to not only the character's voice, the way that they express themselves, the way that they react to different things in the story and the plot beats and whatever, they're also restricted to their own knowledge. When you come over to third person, you are the writer, you are the author. You can write whatever you want about the world, about the history, about different things. Like you understand what I mean? Like there's so much freedom with setting, with world building, with history, with lore in your book that you definitely just can't really have when you're writing in first person. Also a really big positive also is skipping between scenes, skipping between time zones or like time in your book. Also skipping between, of course, characters. So if you have like two separate groups in your book that kind of split up, you can kind of jump in between the two, which is very, very good. And of course, it's extremely hard to do when you're in first person. I mean, of course, you can maybe do time jumping with first person, but I think it's a lot more natural with writing in third person. So I guess those are the very basic, very good positive things about third person. But I do want to add one little more, and that is that it maybe is more natural to you. So I kind of said that first person is more easy. I guess it is more easy, at least for me and a lot of people I've heard. First person is the easiest POV to write. However, third person, I feel like it's most natural. I think when you do tell a story, at least like, yeah, whatever story that you're telling, I think you really, like when you think about starting a book, I think about the setting, I think about, an action. I don't think about what the character's thinking. I don't really think about a lot of those sorts of things. I think it's just more natural, at least starting a book, at least like having especially short stories. Third person is just more natural to me, and it could be more natural to you as well. But just keeping these things in mind. So even though first person may be easier, third person, I think it is might be a bit harder, but it is more natural, at least in most cases. I mean, that's how I feel. Okay, so next up, of course, we have to talk about the restrictions of third person, so the negatives. So the list I kind of came up with was, first, it's boring. When you think about it, like, I don't know, first person I find is really fun. And if the character's, good, and if the author does it really well, it can be such a great book. However, if you do if you do it really badly and your character is terrible and your characters gets a bit boring, that's going to be a flop. However, when I'm talking about third person, right, it could also get boring. I really do think, again, I'm kind of jumping towards both of them, but first person is very interesting and very, very powerful when it's done well. However, third person, it's okay. Like, I think it's just the normal way to tell a story, and that's why it doesn't have those sorts of perks of being different and being very personalized to the story and specifically the characters. So I guess like third person, it is a bit boring sometimes, and it's just like very 2D, I feel like. But if you do it well with first person, it kind of turns 3D. That's just kind of my mind. I know I'm being very confusing, but stay with me. My brain isn't all junk. Anyways, so yeah, it could be boring, at least for a long, long novel, if you know what I mean. Okay, so there's that. The next thing is too much setting. I think when you do start writing third person, you kind of tend to go towards the setting and like making, exposition and just like being so focused on what's around the characters instead of focusing on the characters. And that's why I think third person is extremely great and very good at like plot, but it sometimes does encourage you to lack focus on your characters. And that's kind of a very bad, like negative to third person. But yeah, just kind of think about these tips, these little these little points that I'm talking about, and just like see if it really suits your characters, suits your story, suits the way you want to tell that story. However, something of course I want to talk about at the end of this episode, because we're kind of nearing the end, but I want to talk about my favorite point of view. Okay, so this might seem weird and like, yeah, like obviously, but it's mashing those two together. It's mashing first person and third person together. I would technically say it is still third person, but it has first person elements. And that is, I'm actually doing this sort of POV, like person way of telling my story in my biggest project called Project CZ. And I love it so much. It is the most fun way to write your book. I think with projects with a lot of characters, with stories with a lot of different, characters, it is very hard to pick first person with all of them. And this is something Leigh Bardugo did really, really well, and that is writing third person, but in your character's POV. This might seem a bit confusing, but it's like basically putting those two POVs together by telling from a character's perspective, but through third person. So you're focusing on your character, what they're thinking, kind of how they're telling the story, and you really have, like, even if you're seeing, for example, if you're starting a new chapter, even if your characters are all together, if you focus on one specific character, they're gonna have that, the spotlight, essentially. And this is kind of a little bit hard to understand, but I'm pretty sure if you've read Leigh Bardugo, her Six of Crows book, it is so good. Just read it. I also read that book and was a fan of her before she blew up on TikTok, like, just saying. But yeah, third person, but in your character's perspective. This is so, so great. What I also like to do, at least what I did with my other project, Project CZ, was I like did little symbols and like have the character's name up the top. So it is kind of focusing on that character. But it's just so fun to write, and it's just so subtle, like the way that you kind of tell your story through third person, but with your characters in mind, like that specific character. It's just so interesting, so fun, and it really borders on first person and third person, and also like knowing and kind of just like having your character's voice, because your character's voice is technically there, but it's like your character's voice is working with your voice as a narrator, not narrator. I'm so sorry. But you guys get what I mean. I hope you get what I mean. Okay. However, with that all in mind, of course, that's my favorite POV, kind of smashing them two together. But of course, if you like first person, third person, it really doesn't matter. I don't really know what to call my sort of POV. And I guess a lot of authors do it. And it's just kind of a branch, a very specific branch of third person. So technically, if you were to ask me what's my favorite to write, definitely third person. I wanted to kind of leave you off with some tips to how to choose. I kind of talked about, the pros and cons, but like how do you actually choose from them? And these are three of the most important things I would say to really think about before you write your first word of your book. First, I think it's really, really important to kind of write in a POV that you're comfortable with, that you have skills in. You've kind of practiced it, you kind of have know what to expect and where the restrictions are, where the freedoms are, and just whatever really feels natural to you. That's really, really important. The second thing is to know what you like to read. Do you really hate reading first person? Then I wouldn't think you would like to actually write third person, because you're going to be reading your work, you're going to be writing. It wouldn't work. However, if you like first person, you like to read a lot of first person books, that's really, really cool as well. So yeah, what you like is important. Third thing, look at your genre and also the length of your book. An example is, if you've probably read The Cruel Prince by Holly Black, she did it well, but I think towards the third book, Jude's the main character, it is told in first person, which I thought was really impressive. Being able to make a trilogy in first person, that's insane. And I definitely was getting a little bit bored of her voice towards the end, but she still pulled it off quite well. And that's an example to looking at your length of your story. So if it is a short story, first person, go ahead. If it's just a novel, first person's really good. If it's a huge series, 7 books you're planning on writing, maybe not. That will be definitely a lot harder, and just being stuck in your character's voice. I would just that'll be so hard for me. Maybe you can do it. I could not do it, but just keep those things in mind. And of course, when I said your genre, usually fantasy books, stuff with a lot of world building, a lot of magic system stuff, and history. Third person is usually the way to go, but of course, it's definitely possible to do it in first person. So yeah, that's kind of the episode. I hope this kind of helped. I'm sorry also that I was a bit chattery, a little bit fumbly in my words, because I'm just a little bit insane and still getting used to this podcast thing. But I really hope you guys are enjoying these episodes so far. Again, please just let me know in my YouTube videos on my channel, just how you like my podcast if you do. And of course, follow me on Spotify if you haven't already. Anyways, I love you guys so much. Thank you so much for listening in. It really does mean the world, and I just hope my rambly incoherent very junkyard brain helped in some sort of way. If it didn't, just never listen to me again. Okay, well, I hope you guys have a huge idea of what you want to write. And of course, just relax, see whatever comes natural to you. And I really wish you luck in your projects. So yeah, I love you guys, and I hope to see you in my next episode. Bye-bye.